from contract to closing, where everything comes together. As we move forward from default and remedies, we now shift into the successful side of the transaction, the closing. This is the point where all prior efforts, negotiations, due diligence, and compliance measures culminate in the actual transfer of ownership. Closing is not just a final step, it is the execution of every contractual obligation. If any part of the contract has been misunderstood, overlooked, or improperly handled, it will surface at closing. This is why everything we have discussed in chapters 1 and 2 directly impacts this stage. Under AAC R428-1101, agents must ensure accuracy and completeness in all aspects of the transaction, and closing is where that responsibility is fully tested. What closing actually means in commercial real estate closing is the process by which the property legally transfers from the seller to the buyer. This typically involves the exchange of funds, execution of documents, and recording of the deed with the county recorder. In Arizona, closing is usually handled through an escrow process, where a neutral third party coordinates the transaction. This ensures that all conditions of the contract are met before funds and documents are released. For example, a buyer purchasing a commercial office building in Scottsdale will deposit funds into escrow. Once all contractual conditions are satisfied, escrow records the deed and disperses funds to the seller. This process ties directly to ARS, paragraph 33-4111, which governs the recording of instruments affecting real property. Recording provides public notice and establishes priority of ownership. Final conditions. Before closing, what must be completed? Before a transaction can close, several conditions must be satisfied. These typically include completion of due diligence and expiration of contingency periods, approval of financing and delivery of loan documents, resolution of title issues and issuance of title insurance, delivery of required disclosures and documentation, final walkthrough or property verification. For example, if a title search reveals an unresolved lien on a commercial property in Phoenix, that issue must be cleared before closing can occur. This reinforces that closing is not a single event. It is the result of completing a series of contractual obligations. The role of escrow, the neutral middleman. Escrow plays a central role in commercial transactions by acting as a neutral party that holds funds and documents until all conditions are met. Escrow instructions are derived directly from the purchase contract. If there is a conflict between the contract and escrow instructions, the contract typically controls. For example, escrow will not release funds to the seller until all buyer obligations, such as delivering the purchase price, are satisfied, and all seller obligations, such as delivering clear title, are completed. This process ensures fairness and reduces the risk of one party performing without receiving the benefit of the bargain. Title and deed transfer, establishing ownership. At closing, the seller delivers a deed transferring ownership to the buyer. The type of deed, such as a warranty deed or special warranty deed, determines the level of protection provided to the buyer. Once the deed is recorded, ownership officially transfers. This recording creates a public record of the transaction and protects the buyer against future claims. For example, if a buyer acquires a retail property in Chandler and records the deed, any future claims against the property must recognize the buyer's recorded interest. This ties into the broader concept of chain of title, which tracks ownership history and ensures clear transfer of property rights. Financial settlement, where the numbers must match closing, also involves the final accounting of all financial aspects of the transaction. This includes the purchase price, prorations, closing costs, and any adjustments agreed upon in the contract. Prorations are especially important in commercial transactions, where items such as rent, property taxes, and operating expenses must be allocated between the buyer and seller. For example, if a property generates rental income, the rent collected before closing may need to be prorated so that the buyer receives their fair share after closing. Accuracy in these calculations is critical, as errors can lead to disputes even after the transaction is complete. Agent responsibilities at closing. Final oversight. Agents play a key role in ensuring that the closing process runs smoothly. This includes reviewing settlement statements, confirming that contract terms have been met, and communicating with all parties involved. Under AAC R428-1103, brokers are responsible for supervising transactions and ensuring compliance. This includes verifying that all documentation is complete and properly executed. For example, an agent should review the closing statement to ensure that commissions, fees, and prorations are accurate and consistent with the contract. Failure to do so could result in financial discrepancies or compliance issues. Real-world scenario: when closing delays create risk. Consider a commercial transaction for a multi-tenant property in Gilbert. The buyer is ready to close, but a last-minute issue arises with title. An unreleased lien is discovered. Closing is delayed while the seller works to resolve the issue. If the problem cannot be resolved within the contract timeframe, the buyer may have the right to cancel or extend the closing date. This example highlights how even at the final stage, unresolved issues can impact the transaction. Connecting closing to the full contract lifecycle. Closing is the final step in the contract lifecycle, where all prior sections come together. The parties, property, earnest money, due diligence, disclosures, timelines, and performance all lead to this moment. A successful closing reflects a well-managed transaction. Every deadline met, every disclosure completed, and every obligation fulfilled contributes to a smooth transfer of ownership. As we move into the final section of this chapter, we will explore post-closing considerations and ongoing obligations, because even after closing, the transaction may not be entirely complete. Online discussion. Why is closing considered the most critical stage of a real estate transaction? Answer: because it is the point where ownership transfers and all contractual obligations must be fulfilled. Any errors or omissions can prevent the transaction from completing successfully. What role does escrow play in the closing process? Answer: escrow acts as a neutral third party that holds funds and documents until all contract conditions are met, ensuring a fair and secure transaction. Why is recording the deed important? Answer: recording provides public notice of ownership and protects the buyer's interest in the property against future claims.